Hi, I'm Nichole Argo, and welcome back to Reimagining Us. We are thrilled to be joined today by Monica Guzman. Monica, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start. Tell us a bit about your story. What inspired you to write I Never Thought of It That Way?
So I Never Thought of It That Way is the capping off of something of an obsessive journey to figure out why so much of the world around me seemed to have lost its ability to see itself. And by the world around me, I mean the people in it. I kept hearing from one group of people I knew things about another group of people I knew that were totally wrong. And I didn't know how to begin to reframe what was being said. I am in a politically divided family of Mexican immigrants, all of us, and my parents went Republican in the last several presidential elections, actually all of them, and I've been Democrat in all of them. And in 2016, things heated up a whole lot, like they did for so many families and neighborhoods all across the country. At the time, I was running a local publication in Seattle. And what I faced as a journalist was understanding the pressure that different communities put on each other to conform to one point of view and only make room for one point of view. But as a journalist, I believed from the beginning that curiosity was important to the craft, and that it's really core to our ability to understand each other at all. And as an immigrant from Mexico, grew up with my family telling me stories before elections got a bit cleaned up in Mexico. Only one party ever won. Things were pretty rough. Still pretty darn rough for journalists. The United States has a lot going for it. And I just thought, whoa, hang on. What can I do to try to help people take a step back and discover some tools and strategies that they may not realize are there, but that really are there, that I discovered almost accidentally from talking with my parents initially, and then from starting to expand my world beyond fellow liberals, but to lots of people who hold different opinions, and just seeing things that I didn't see before because I got a little bit closer, as I have learned to do as a journalist. Like I interviewed someone who was on death row in Texas and then watched him die via execution. I've learned to talk to anyone. And so turns out when you talk to some of the people who you think are scary, they're not.
That's so true. And it's something that we hear a lot as we travel and talk to folks about the idea that people want to have conversations. They want to be curious. We asked a group of people about, what do you hope how do you hope they would react if you said something that they might disagree with? And I was convinced they were going to say, I just wish they would tolerate me. I wish they would do this. And almost without fail, people say, I wish they would just be curious about what I thought. And so hearing you talk about that makes me ask the question of what are some of the key ingredients to a good conversation across differences? I mean, how can we use curiosity as a tool to combat, polarization, arguments, discomfort, especially where places where the tensions are so high?
Yeah, and that's where it matters the most right now. It's easy to get curious when you're super interested and it feels totally comfortable and like you've got time and this is great. It's harder to get curious in the places where we really need it. Yeah, which is where we have assumptions and certainties that are not well informed. So one place to start is the context. If you are looking to engage in a conversation about abortion with somebody who disagrees with you, and you want to start on Facebook, maybe rethink that. Just you want to continue the conversation on Instagram or on TikTok or even on text thread. Maybe rethink that. In the book, I've talked about these various characteristics of conversations where if certain of those characteristics are dialed up to a certain level, you're just going to have it's going to be far more likely that you will find purchase across the disagreement enough to build the kind of trust that allows curiosity to really flow freely. So on social media, one of the things you really lose is the full toolbox of human communication. Here you can see me gesture, you can hear my tone, you can see my smiles, right? When we are in disagreement and all we have is words, we tend to read into those words tones that aren't there.
Mm.
You know, that exclamation point sounds offensive when the other person was just trying to be soothing. And so that's just a recipe for disaster. And it's really nice to try to change those characteristics. So if a political conversation starts on X, on Twitter, pick up the phone or at least make it a private conversation. So you can think about the context in various ways. You can also think about yourself, your own goals, and your own kind of state of being. If you are really afraid of the other person, really afraid, then neurobiologically, you're going to jump to the trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And if you are in the trauma responses out of fear or for whatever it is, curiosity is going to be really hard in that moment. So if there's somebody that you're really scared of and you're like, man, they want me to talk to that person, probably not. The first step is probably to find someone you're not so scared of, or a set of ideas that don't scare you as much if you were to approach someone who believes them, and by the way, is way more than just their belief in that idea. There's a pastor at the Othering, not a pastor. There's a teacher at the Othering and Belonging Institute named John Powell. He tells this beautiful story that he's a bridge builder, and he talks about that. And a pastor came to him and said, John, are you asking me to bridge with the devil? And John said, maybe don't start there. Just not with the devil. He talked about the difference between building long bridges and short bridges. So look for those folks and those ideas where there's some tension and there's some disagreement and there's some, discomfort within you, but it's not so much. And so after a while of building those short bridges, John says, you may ask yourself who you're calling the devil. So I'll leave it at that. There's so many more tools, but I'll just start with those.
That's powerful. And we just had a conversation with John last week.
Yay.
He'll be the episode before you. So this is perfectly timed. Yeah.
Excellent. He is amazing.
So to follow up on that a little bit, what would you say are the biggest mistakes that people make when they're trying to have these conversations? We hear this is one of the biggest fears that we've heard in our focus groups is folks who really, really do want to engage, and they're not quite sure how to go about it or where. But even if it were to drop in their lap, they're afraid to say something wrong.
Yeah.
So are there tendencies that people tend to have that we can just be aware of and know that at least we're not going to do that?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest, I don't know if I would call it a mistake because it's fairly natural. It just happens. The only thing you can do is be conscious of it, really, and then make your choices, is not realizing that your motive has changed from wanting to understand this other person, wanting to connect around what's being believed here, to wanting to win, wanting to defend myself. I need to be right. Something has been triggered in me that I can't let stand. And so now my motive in the conversation isn't what was the stated motive or what I believed I was in here doing to begin with. This has happened so many times with me and my father. I can't even tell you. We know how to push each other's buttons, and that's fine so long as you know when your buttons have been pushed. And that's the thing, is that somebody can push your buttons and you don't even realize that you have changed yourself in the conversation. So I have kind of woken up in the middle of conversations with him, and this happens all the time with all kinds of people, and realized that for the last several minutes, I've really just been trying to attack his character because I feel like he's attacking something about me or mine or the things I value. And then I go, whoa, like everything I did and said in that time of darkness when I didn't realize that I was in that mode, I now regret, right? And if I am in the space of curiosity, then I can't be in the space of domination.
Mm.
I can't. But I just have to notice, because those things will switch. It's often begins with physical sensation. Like if you really kind of pay attention, like a radar across your whole body, when somebody says something that you go, whoa, it actually like, maybe it hits you in the gut, or like in the throat or in the belly, and you feel it. And that's where, like, chemically your body will start to change, and it'll come up to your mind, and then before you know it, you're so not curious anymore. You're trying to manipulate and sabotage. So just notice when that happens. And then it's about, once you've noticed, okay, now you have choices. You can take a break in the conversation. You can say, you know what? I don't think this is the moment right now. You can change the subject to get to something calmer until your nervous system relaxes and you can come back to it. You can call out the feeling, you can say like, I think this is someplace that is really hard for me to go to. I have to tell you, like, I often feel attacked when people start saying these things. I don't think that's what you mean. I just want you to know that we've reached somewhere a little bit sensitive for me. And if you share some of that reaction you're having with the other person, and there's no script for this, whatever language you tend to use, then once again, you can collaborate on trying to build back. Because most of the time, the other person doesn't want to upset you. Like, maybe they're caught in their own domination loop. And so if they think they do, for a minute they do. But as soon as you remind them that that's probably not the intention, then they'll be like, oh, okay. Sorry, I get carried away with that sometimes, but I really do believe strongly in that. Okay. So there's all kinds of things you can do. But that is a really, really big thing. You start to think that if you just convince, if you just go right through the front and you just tell them they're wrong and try to shame them, come on, we're going to change them. And that is not how persuasion works. Never has been. And no, it's not going to work.
I love that. You already started talking about skills and strategies and ways to actually, I think, build confidence in your ability to engage with folks. And we know that that's a huge part of getting people to actually, start building those bridges and having those conversations, is they need to have a little bit of confidence or psychological safety, as something I've learned from Nichole. But, you say in your book, which I love, where you say, when you ask, how could anyone think that? You're not really asking a question, you're closing a door.
That's right.
And I think, if you just remember, if as someone who wants to have a conversation, if we can all just remember that, how can I look at ways to keep the door open? And for myself and for the person I'm talking to, it makes a huge difference. And it's just a matter of keeping that in your brain. So to move into another section, still talking about skills and strategies, we've got 6 questions that, well, I have to give Nichole credit. She's the one who knows all this, that we would love for you to answer them at a pace, not rapid fire, but also not going like deep into them, just your thoughts, just quick, and a practice response that listeners can, keep in their back pocket as they engage with other people. Is that okay? Can you be willing to do that? Great.
Let's do it.
Well, I'll kick off the first one. How do you recommend responding when someone says something offensive or harmful in the middle of a conversation?
If it's offensive to you, or you think it's harmful to others, that's a bit different. If they say something that you feel kind of hurts you, it's okay to show that. Oof, or ouch. Show that. Show that you've been a bit hurt, because sometimes they didn't mean to. And if they see evidence that, oh, that hit you in a way that I didn't mean, before you even have to say anything, they'll go, oh, no, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't mean it that way. So give people the chance to do that by letting them see some of the feedback. If you swallow it and just keep a poker face, they may not be getting the feedback that they would want as somebody who hopefully is a compassionate human being who wants you to be okay. When you hear something you believe to be harmful to others, then if it's if it's others, or there's so many categories of this, you may want to pull this apart. But in general, boy, that's a really juicy, interesting place to come in. Hopefully, it's a conversation that is contained, meaning it's not a live interview broadcast to millions of people where, holy crap, I need to correct you right now because there's so many people listening, right?
Mhm.
If it's just you and this other person, the harm, what's really happening in the room? What's happening in the room is that two people are having a conversation. There's no harm happening right now, right? There's the perception I have that your ideas are harmful based on what it might lead you to do or you to inspire in others. But we are still in the space of conversation. We're still space of relative safety. It just may not feel that way. Once I hear an idea that I think is harmful, in fact, I may feel a threat level that puts me in trauma responses, and then I might actually ruin the conversation by overreacting. So that can happen, right? Where you go, no, and you think, I can't be okay. The world can't be okay if this person leaves this conversation believing this thing. And so then you end up leaving curiosity to a place of survival, which, let's be clear, right? There are some pretty scary ideas out there. But again, what I said before, shaming people for the ideas they have, judging them outright, being condescending, attacking, it's not going to work very well. So you might want to try a different tack. And really, it's back to curiosity, back to listening, and honesty. So I hear an idea that I find harmful. Hopefully, I have some of the guts and space to say something like, I gotta tell you, I hope you can hear this, but what you just said, I worry about that because I worry that thinking like that can lead to this and this and this. What do you think? Right? So plumb the depths of that instead of just assuming that idea equals harm in all contexts. Again, give the other person a chance to explain.
So this next one is, what do you do when the person you're talking to isn't curious or willing to engage?
Yeah, on a certain level, if they're not willing to engage, then engagement is just not going to happen no matter what you do. So, you need, it takes two to tango, and you can't force someone to talk. But it's I hope encouraging to know that research strongly suggests that curiosity is contagious. So if you begin a conversation and you see resistance, reluctance, hesitation, closedness to you and the other person, that doesn't have to be the end. What you can then do is you model the curiosity. You speak with curiosity. You try one gentle, non-judgmental question. Try another a little bit later. Take a break. Try another. People tend to soften over time when they realize that you actually aren't out to get them, that you really aren't here to try to condescend or look down. Over time. Sometimes folks' reluctance to be curious comes from a belief that you're going to hurt them or it's not going to be pleasant to talk to you. For whatever reason, sometimes maybe there's a history there and maybe you haven't been the most amazing conversation partner. Sometimes they look at you and they see a representative of a group that is hostile to them. There's not much you can do about that except to be the exception. Just show them over and over again that you are not those things, that they're afraid all liberals are, all conservatives are, all people who think this way or that way are. So it is softening and it is a patient kind of thing. But research really does show if I use more flexible language, if I use hedging language, as it's called, where instead of saying this is this, I go, right now as I think about it, I think this is this. What do you think? Right? You use that flexible language, it does get imitated in a conversation. Is it a guarantee? No. But it's a heck of a lot more likely. So give that a try. Curiosity is contagious. It only takes one.
Oof. Nice.
That's so great. Thanks. Okay, here's another one. Define splitting and why it can be a useful dialogue strategy.
Ooh, yes. I've noticed that splitting is used for a lot of different techniques. So if this isn't the one that you're thinking of, I swear I've seen it used for contradictory things. It's really weird. There's not one definition. The splitting that I think of that I love, which may not be the one you think of, like David Brooks has another one. Is when you say what you're saying by saying what you're not saying.
Tell me more.
Okay, you may not know this one, but that's what I think of when I think of as splitting. So you are, having a disagreement, and it's about, let's say immigration. And you explain something about your perspective by saying, I'm not saying that there should be open borders. I believe that there should be judicious regulation and etc. But I do believe that we would benefit from a policy that is not restrictive and that mostly holds a welcome mat to immigrants. A liberal might say that on immigration policy. So you basically that kind of splitting, what it does is it addresses the barrier in the other person, the thing that the other side sees in your side that it's scared of, right? I'm not saying that I wouldn't use somebody's pronouns. If it's they, them, I'll use they, them pronouns. But I don't appreciate when a community meeting begins with everyone needing to state their own pronouns. And here's why, right? If you're conservative, maybe you're coming from something like that. So you clear up what you're not saying so that the person can hear what you are saying.
That's so interesting to me from just like a cognitive psychology of your, I would immediately think that you're associating with something that they think they know. And this is probably why it works, because then you're saying, no, but it's not that. But I would think people might get stuck or glom onto some binary, and it sounds like that's not what's happening, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Anything you can do rhetorically in your words to sort of let people show their work, not just state a conclusion and defend it, but rather, I think of this, which leads me to this, and then leads me to this, but I don't go here. I just come over here, right? The more of the path that you let the other person see, the more on-ramps they'll have to really understanding you, and not replacing, not like substituting their own imagination for what you actually believe. Like, you give them a little, it's like the math teacher in 6th grade who gave me extra credit for showing my work. It's exactly like that. Like, my conclusion may be wrong according to you, but at least my math makes sense, And sometimes with politics, that's really all you can do, is just, I can get to the place where people's math makes sense. It's just like, but I don't know, but somewhere in here we come to a different answer. Like, that's not the answer I see. But so far, like, you're showing me your work. I'm like, okay, given who you are and what you value, yeah, like, I can see how 2 + 2 = 5 here for you. I get that.
The other brilliance of that strategy is you start to see intention. By showing one's work, you see the values, you see where they're coming from, why they're coming from, how they're coming from, which is pretty amazing.
Well, and Nichole, one of the things that I thought of, another thing that you've taught me, which is maybe it's also a way to signal that I hear you and I see you,
Yes.
and I understand. And so it kind of takes that moment away, kind of softens the moment of, you are not even listening to me.
Yes.
You know,
totally.
And that idea of mattering and seeing and being seen. So that's what I hear too.
Absolutely. And we're trying to prove ourselves too much, as if, I don't know, we have to meet somebody's expectations. I mean, really what it is nobody actually wants to live in a world where they have to be perfect or be the thing that everybody expects. Like, we really just want to be free to be ourselves. So, granting someone else the grace to be themselves. Like, one of the ways you can do that is by being curious, by staying curious about them. Okay, something about what they've said, I don't like that. Okay, ask about that. Don't judge them. Ask. Just say, whoa, when you said that, I thought of this. Is that what you meant? Oh, it isn't. Oh, okay. Did I hear you right? Did I understand you right? And if it is what they meant, oh, okay. Tell me more, because I'm not seeing it that way. Right? And we're still granting space. We're still granting grace. And then people get that beautiful opportunity to explore themselves in your presence. And that's where persuasion actually happens. We can only change our own minds, not anybody else's.
I love that. That's a golden nugget right there. So before we move on from this one, and you don't have to answer this, but you mentioned David Brooks has a different definition. What is it?
I'm trying to remember. I have his book. I would have to look it up because
it's not, no worries.
It's sort of mixing. There's a few. I think I've seen 3 different ones. Which one are you thinking of? Because I've probably heard it.
I knew yours, so
okay.
That's why I thought
I don't know what that is, and so that's
okay.
why
okay.
I do it.
Yeah,
you'll see this is how we
go. Oh, I have heard splitting being. It seems like it's almost a substitute for like othering, sorting. You know, that I'm going to split this person and this person, and so I'm splitting. I don't know. I'm getting lost in it. I'm actually not sure that I remember.
Amanda Ripley writes about this. I think that is out there.
Ripley writes about it too. Exactly.
In a dehumanization pathway. Yeah, I totally.
Yeah, so splitting is bad in that, but in the world of like rhetoric, like professors of rhetoric, I talk about splitting in the way I was talking about.
And in the world of clinical psychology, of course, it has a completely different, like splitting from oneself, right? Because it's too much to hold. So there's a lot going on with splitting, and it's been neat to see it enter this space.
Yes.
I love it as a technique.
There you go.
Okay. What would you say to someone who feels like they've failed after having a tough conversation? So they try this. And yeah.
Well, first I would say, look at your definition of failure. To me, a conversation is always a minimal level of successful if you can continue it some other time. So if you have completely burned the bridge with this person and you can no longer, like, you're done, you're out, never again. Okay, yeah, that's pretty rough. But if there's still some room to come back, even to repair, right? Because there's a cycle, rupture and repair. We never talk about the repair. We only talk about the rupture. People in media, we don't see in the news any models of repair, which makes us think that once there's rupture, you've failed. It's over. It's done. You may as well never approach that person again, certainly never bring up the topic, and like be horribly uncomfortable if you're ever in their presence again. That's not right. That's not true. That's never been true of humanity. We can always repair. So again, like, reevaluate your definition of failure. If you failed to convince them, you were going to fail to convince them anyway. So please don't define failure that way. That's not a thing. It may look like it's a thing on social media because you got all those likes and they didn't say anything in response. Yeah, that doesn't mean they changed their mind. Sorry. So, or whatever. Or like you didn't change their mind. If you feel like, if you feel so hurt or like you hurt them, again, that's rupture. Now go to repair. Is there an apology that needs to happen? Is there an opening? Do you need to go and do some self-reflection just to see, because a lot of times we only see what the other person did to cause the rupture, but never what we did. It's usually a combination. Like, can you reflect on the dynamic, not who they are, but the dynamic of them and you together, right? That's something might have gone wrong there. Can you analyze? Can you figure out what that was? And then can you humbly maybe begin the process of repair? So again, there's all that. Why else might there be failure? You tell me.
You kind of answered the last of these 6 questions in that answer, which is really like, how do you measure success? And I think what you're saying in many cases is that you can continue the conversation. Because, changing minds isn't always the goal. Yeah. And it shouldn't be your goal, really. It's a curiosity, and it's keeping engagement going and the opportunity to continue conversations. What else would you add to that about you're successful if?
Yeah. I think, and this is no surprise, that you're successful if there's a lot of I never thought of it that way moments in the conversation where you and hopefully the other person are thinking of things in new ways. I keep thinking of the prism like as an object where you turn it and it has all these facets and it refracts light in different ways, and like white light comes in and then here's all these colors. It's about that. However you happen to see this one issue is how you happen to see this one issue. You have walked your path through life. You have read what you've read. You've absorbed what you've absorbed. You've reacted to what you've reacted to. You are one person, right? This is a country of millions. Go figure out how someone else, that issue comes into them and turns into different colors, which shades come out for them. And the more that we learn about other people's different angles, the more we can like add to our own understanding of ultimately highly complex things. So every time you are in a conversation, you go, I never thought of it that way. Or you just think it like, oh yeah. You don't have to like it, by the way. Whoa, I never thought of it that way, in that, yike. Okay. But even then, you're seeing, it's not about whether you like it or don't. It's just about whether it's surfaced for you, right? And if it's surfaced for you, it is now in your range of vision, then you have an opportunity to understand something new. That's really cool. So I find that successful. Even one of those moments, I think, is discovery. It's literal discovery at the intersection between people's perspectives, which is what we desperately need. So yeah, I find that successful. And most of the time, and there's been studies on this, a really cool study over the last year that showed that we tend to underestimate how much we will enjoy conversations across disagreement. Like, we just think they're going to suck. And they usually don't. There's usually at least one joke thrown in there, a little laughter to reduce the tension. Right. There's
a surprise moment of agreement.
Exactly. Common ground, right? I feel like people, I don't know, I tend to avoid saying and like, look for common ground, because I hear myself and I sound like a cliche, because it is a cliche. Common ground. But it is there. It does exist. Of course there's common ground. And so yeah, like, find places of common ground, surprising points of agreement. Exactly. Or just feel a little closer to the other person. Or, this is actually one of my favorites, discover something about yourself. Mm-hmm. It's not often that we're confronted with our own opinion. When you are in a conversation of disagreement, that might be the first time in a while, given how divided we are, that someone's even asked you what you think of this. And now you have to answer it to somebody who doesn't agree with you, which means you have to explain more than you normally do. Uh-oh. Now you gotta do your work in your own brain. Like, does my opinion even make sense to me? Right? We don't get those opportunities, which is one of the reasons that a politically divided society, in my view, tends to dumb down over time, because we're not challenging each other. So yeah, so many ways for it to be successful.
Wow. I just want to say, as you were talking about this as discovery of self, of the other, of the values, of the connections, I kept thinking about that prism. And what I like about the image is that it's magical, right? You're imagining this conversation and these colors are whirring around and they say something and all of a sudden you have like this flash of light. And I think at some very human level, where connection and being seen and seeing is almost, it's like spiritual, right? It matters to all of us. Yes. It is magical. Like, these conversations are magical, which is, I saw the headline and I haven't read the study, but I wonder if that's why it's so shocking. We go in thinking this is going to be a pain, and then we're like, that was almost spiritual.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought up that language. Magical, spiritual. So much of our discourse happens on platforms, and it's sort of all technological now, and people write articles with arguments, with paragraphs that all like add up, and everything just feels like conclusions stacked on conclusion, conclusion, and that the only way we're taken seriously is we have our conclusions straight. And that's not human. That's not human. We're not robots, but we have to be with each other in human ways. Off of some of these spaces that tend to flatten us, to really remember that magic is with us all the time, And that's when you'll start by talking about, I don't know, elections, and you'll end up talking about the meaning of life. Like, it's amazing. You know what I mean? Like, you'll end up talking about how important like safety is and freedom and these virtues and all of that. And then it reminds you of growing up, and then you have this memory, and then it's politics is not its own kind of academic field of study. Like, politics is how we thrive together. That is boundless. And we don't think of it that way. We think of it in this technocratic way. It's not. So yeah, once you get into these conversations, you give them a little room to breathe, you allow curiosity to come in. This is all about how to human. That's all this is. I actually kind of, yeah, I mean, I tell people this, that I'm not in politics right now because I love politics. I'm in politics because I hate what it's doing to people. And by that, I mean, I hate what we are doing to ourselves as a result of what we feel and think about politics. So that's why I'm here. I am no wonk. I actually avoided the political stories as a news reporter every chance I got. I'm doing this because it's ultimately about how to human.
And one of the things that, just to piggyback on that, is like, I love the language that you use, Nichole, to describe it. But I also, going back to what you just said, Monica, is I also see it as freedom. If I don't have to stick to my guns and I don't have to stay this line because I've got something to prove, knowing that it is a prism, knowing that it's not one thing or two things, it can be a zillion things, whether they're things you already knew, things that you feared, things that you discovered, whatever that is a bit freeing to me. It's like, I now have the ability to ask, tell me more, or I never thought of it that way.
Yes.
Instead, that's not a weakness. And I think a lot of people feel like, I should have known that. I should have known that.
I
do that. I have whole other conversations in my head going, I should have thought of that.
Oh, yeah, I know. I do the same thing. A fun question to reflect on for anyone listening is just, what are your favorite conversations from your whole life? Like, think about the conversations you enjoyed the most. And then think about what they had in common, right? Often, there was a lot of time, a lot of shared space with people over a long period of time. And often those conversations were not about one or two things. They were wide ranging. What does that mean? I think it means that those conversations reached a point where it was like warp speed. You're just like, broke the barrier, and now you're just being together. You're just opening up to each other. You're just exploring whatever comes up. This is why road trip movies are about transformations. Because in a car, when people are in a car for hours and hours on end, they are all facing forward. They are not confronting each other with eye contact. It is easier for conversations to be collaborative and additive. So this is why the road trip movie is movies about transformation, because the characters tend to be with each other and explore each other in idleness and in boredom. And whatever thought comes up as you look out the window, now you share it with somebody. And you get that little magic moment where they go, oh yeah. And then you start talking about who knows what. Like, I find that those are the best conversations. Those are the most nourishing and incredible conversations. And there's no reason that in fact, like, for me, the most memorable conversations also include, we talked about the hard stuff. There was one conversation with my friends in England when I studied there in college, my junior year. We talked through the night. We saw the sun come up. And we talked about religion. We talked about politics. We talked about everything. We got mad. We laughed. We cried. Everything. And we felt more in love with each other as friends at the end of it.
I'm going to pull out this second image of warp speed because the imagery is killing me here. But what you just said about car time, in our family, we say car time's quality time. Yes. And there are times at the dinner table when I'm asking my kids, tell me about the math test or whatever it is, what's going on with that friend, where my kids literally say, can we talk about it in the car tomorrow?
Wow.
Which is, and I just thought it was something that we did well with car time. Like, I'd never thought about that, but it's so true. You're not looking at each other and you're free.
Exactly. You are free. You're looking at the world. You're in your own idleness, and there's no stakes, and there's nowhere else to go. And there's nothing else you have to do because you're in the car, you're driving, whatever. There's nothing else to do. You're there. The other thing with my kids is, often I'm taking one of them to, skiing, or I'm taking one of them to wherever. Skiing is a weird example. That's her dad. But anyway, to gymnastics, to swimming, to tennis. And it's just me and one of my kids, right? And it's not my two kids and the two parents. And there's these family roles and there's performances and, again, things to prove. And that's normal. So containment, 1-to-1, both facing the same direction for an hour because traffic's bad on the way to tennis. We talk about a lot.
Yeah. What a privilege,
Yeah.
right? It's a rare thing in modern life.
It is. It is.
So, would you give me a little grace? I want to go back to something you said earlier about rupture and repair.
Mhm.
That it really resonates with me. I do think that when there is a rupture and it's not repaired right away, a lot of us, we walk away with a heavy heart, right? And it sits with us, and
Yeah.
it might feel like failure. But I keep thinking about rupture and repair is a part of every human relationship, even mothers and infants. I can't remember the exact number of times in a minute where there's a rupture and repair, but it's in the tens. I think it's in the 60s, where there's cues of disconnection and then a desire to reconnect and an action to reconnect.
Yeah.
And my question for you is this, like, in my own community work, one thing I've seen is after difficult conversations or ruptures, when the repair happens, a sense of accomplishment and trust is stronger. The sense of we will get through. We have a relationship and a process, and it's not about outcomes. And I'm wondering if in your work, writ large or at Braver Angels, or just like, do you see that? Or do you know of studies? Is there a thing where if you have a rupture, things get stronger, assuming they go forward at all?
Yeah. I can't think of a study offhand. So who knows if there is one? There ought to be one. I intuitively and anecdotally, it's 100% true. I mean, that absolutely. I can think of so many scenarios where it's, I mean, I love your example of the parent and the infant, because there's limited communication. They speak different languages. They really do. They kind of rely on sort of physical cues and the obligation that the parent has to take care of and really watch the infant. But there's so much feedback that has to happen. There's so much in order to be known at all. Like my sister-in-law has a 9-month-old, very different from when my babies were babies. Like, my goodness, she is completely different. And the only way to know that baby whose language you don't speak is to just pay a lot of attention, have a lot of grace, try to sleep and have the energy when you come into these interactions. But yeah, absolutely, like repair, and know that nothing is breaking. Luckily, the baby doesn't have the ability to just run away from you and like cut you out of their lives, right? Because boy, we do that a lot these days when we don't like each other. But if you don't, I love what you said, because I believe, and I think that life holds this up, that if we don't engage in cycles of rupture and repair, we cannot know each other. We can only pretend to. Right? Like, we can only pretend to know each other and then keep up this artifice of behavior. Like, we're all behaving with each other. We're all tolerating each other, right? Our rules are good enough or whatever. But then as things change too much for the structures we have in place to maintain them, then stuff's going to get really uncomfortable really fast. And there's going to be a lot of pain and misunderstanding. I think that's where we are right now. Like, every missed opportunity to have those small ruptures that happen one-to-one and that can be forgiven, and that people know how to reach to that person and say, I'm sorry, and people know how to do that. Like, every time we miss that, it builds up the pressure for the higher level explosion to be bigger. And no one knows how to repair that one, because whose job is it? It's not my job. Well, it's not my job. I don't know whose job it is. It's all like dissolved. I love that you said this, because it really does. Like, I just believe that all of this starts at the smallest level, at the one-to-one relationship. And there's so many people across the country who are like, this is not my job. I got to wait for the politicians to figure this out, for the media to figure this out. They're the ones misbehaving. Like, I'm just over here. No. This is the trust you build or break with each other. It does have to do with stuff. It does scale up. Don't miss that. How we treat each other, how you treat another person who disagrees with you in that one conversation, that moment matters. This is not to put pressure on you so that you feel guilty. Just the opposite. It's so that we just accept that this is supposed to be messy. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but it's a big deal because we're out of practice.
So true. I really love that analogy, and the way we have to rupture and repair, and we actually do that all the time in our lives. I think. I feel we do. But, we've talked a lot about what individuals can do to promote connection across differences in their lives. But what about communities?
Oh,
Would you
yeah.
have advice for municipalities, organizations, or individual leaders, like police chiefs, superintendents, or others,
Yeah.
as they design spaces and structures and systems to govern local life?
Yeah. I think one of the top challenges right now for designing community meetings and convenings and gatherings is you have to have your eyes wide open to the bad habits and unserving assumptions that have been baked into some of those designs. What am I trying to say? There are so many community meetings that are excluding people without even realizing that they're excluding people. And because the political divide is so sharp, and because so many of our communities out there tend to be in either very liberal spaces or very conservative spaces, there are some in the middle, right? There are those purplish communities. But even in purple places, this particular organization tends to lean blue. This particular community tends to lean red. And so right there, that what that means is that you haven't had enough of a mix to actually co-create, to create something that can really include all kinds of people. So whether it's, having a space that can include folks up and down the socioeconomic ladder, having spaces that can include folks across the religious divide, like different religions, no religion, having spaces that include folks across liberal and conservative, of course, young and old. That one's really, really hard. Here in Seattle, we lean very, very left. Oh boy. Oh boy. I put myself in the place of someone with fairly, just kind of typical Republican beliefs and values. And hey, it's tricky to sit for 5 minutes at the top of some of these, civic meetings and feel like your perspective is actually welcome. It's tough. But this is not to rag on Seattle. This is most places from one direction or another. And we don't have time to talk about all the things to possibly look at, and we haven't figured it all out. But if you're in community, ask yourself what perspectives you're missing. Because in order to convene, you have to know enough about the different languages of different perspectives. You have to know enough. So if you happen to be in the privileged position of being a leader who has the ability and the authority to convene in certain ways, be extra humble right now. Be really, really humble. Reach out to the folks that you wish would come but keep not coming. Like, really talk to them. Who are you missing? Why? Just ask really tough questions, and you will feel a little slapped in the face as you learn, like, well, it's because when you ask people to do this or do that, it's like annoying. What? Like, just figure that out, right? So anyway, that's super important. I think that's the beginning, because a lot of these civic spaces are becoming overly politicized one way or the other, and that's a real problem. So we need to open those things back up.
Well, having come out of government, it's interesting. I think one of the things we always tried to do, and something to make sure that happens, is you absolutely have to be intentional. And sometimes you have to go to people instead of just inviting them into your space.
Yes.
Sometimes you have to go to their space.
Exactly.
And sometimes you do that first before you do the bigger space. And so, but you have to be intentional about saying, what do I need to do? How do I need to do it? And how is it going to be received? And then you go in with that mindset. And I know that's something that, we did during Mayor Landrieu's administration. It was very intentional.
Yes. And I love that. And it may not be always forever. There might be steadier times when, whatever, it just feels a little more like this stuff is happening organically. But right now is a time of severe questioning. We need a lot of questions. We need to begin from the beginning. And to your point, like, you're that leader. Absolutely. Go out and have coffee with that person who is trusted by many people who appear not to trust you enough to come. Like, figure them out, right? It's you cannot scale relationships. We keep trying because, again, we're in love with technology. Look, technology can scale. I can send an email to 1,000 people. Great. You can't build community that way. You just can't do it. You have to do it person by person, and trust is organic.
I love that. That's great. Okay. Monica, we're nearing the end of our time, so we want to leave you with the last word. Is there anything that you would like to say to our listeners today? What would you like them to hold on to that you've already shared or that you haven't had a chance yet?
I think we've brought up, and this is part of that spiritual thing, that conversation is a big way that we are known, that we know each other. Language is the best, albeit imperfect, tool we have for communicating our meaning to each other. And conversation is not supposed to be polished. It's not supposed to be scripted. I see some AI bots that are like, oh, you're in a disagreement, just plug it into the AI bot. I'm like, no, you don't have to get this perfect. Really, 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 conversation is the most incredibly sophisticated series of micro decisions and ways that we listen to each other. And it's so powerful. And just, I challenge everyone, like, just have one more conversation this week that you're a little bit afraid to have. Not really afraid, but a little bit afraid to have. Just ask that question and see what happens, and keep yourself honest to yourself about your intentions. That I'm here to connect, I'm here to learn, I'm here to understand. And if I feel a certain kind of way that makes me want to react, let me not react, but let me just notice that. Be like, oh, wow, that upset me. Okay, I'll take that with me. Like, that upset me in a small way. Let me figure out why. Maybe I'll learn something. And that's it. We don't have to save the world in every conversation. We can't convince other people in one conversation very easily at all. The best thing we can try to do is build trust and connection with each other right now across difference. That's it.
I love that.
Thank you so much for this time and your great words and your fantastic book that I think people will get a lot out of. I never thought of it that way. So thank you so much.
And Monica, thank you for your spirit. It's been delightful. Your personality and the life you bring to this conversation, to the work that you're doing, which is, yes, on the one hand, it's really hard. And I know it's also, on the other hand, it's incredibly inspiring to be working with so many people who are connecting in all these ways. But it's just been a real pleasure, and it's wonderful to listen and learn from you.
Thank you. And likewise, I loved your questions. This was so fun. Thank you, Nichole and Scott. Really, really fun.
Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Until next time, stay connected, stay hopeful, and keep reimagining what's possible.
See you next time on Reimagining Us.